Hi, my name is Dave Gayshock, and I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 14 and a parent at the Heath School, which we're hoping that by the end of this fall will be renamed the Roland Hayes School. Warrant Article 13 in fall 2023 town meeting here in Brookline proposes to make that name change, and it does so for a few reasons. First, our school wasn't actually named to honor anyone in the first place. It got its name kind of by accident. It was named after the street that it originally was on, which in turn was named after a family that owned land around that street, the Heath family. So it was never named to honor the Heath family as much as it was just kind of got its name by accident that way. But also, we have since learned that as it indirectly carries the name of the Heath family, we've also learned some things about the Heath family way back in time. At least one generation of the Heath family back in the 18th century owned slaves and enslaved other people here in Brookline while slavery was legal in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that's something that is added to the fact that that's not necessarily the legacy that we want to honor with our school name, even if it was indirect. So a process, an open public process for the last 18 months, led originally by adults and community members and then ultimately led by students, has selected a new name for the Heath School, and that is the Roland Hayes School, to honor Roland Hayes, who was a longtime, very accomplished resident of Brookline. He grew up in Georgia on a farm in which his mother had been an enslaved person not long beforehand. And through grit and determination and force of will, worked his way up through a career in music to become a world-renowned opera singer who also introduced African-American spiritual music to a much broader audience. And during that time, Mr. Hayes overcame all kinds of adversity, including hostile audiences and theaters that would not allow him to perform, and ultimately succeeded through his determination and grit. And he settled after touring the world in Brookline. And he said that the decades he spent in Brookline were the happiest place for him that he had been. And we want to honor him as an accomplished and not as well known as he should be member of the Brookline community. And so hopefully at the end of this cycle of town meeting, we will have a vote of town meeting to ratify the vote of the Heath School community to rename our school the Roland Hayes School effective January 1st, 2024. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ezra Kleinbaum. I'm a Precinct 10 resident and a junior at Brookline High School, and I'm one of the ones who is leading the initiative behind Warrant Article 14. Warrant Article 14 is a measure to combat puppy mills, kitten mills, rabbit mills, and other large-scale commercial, cruel breeding facilities that keep animals in small, filthy cages and force them through pregnancy cycle after pregnancy cycle. The language that we've introduced as Article 14 is modeled after bylaws that other towns, including Cambridge and Plymouth, have passed. Once we adapted the language to Brookline, it was reviewed by both the town council and the moderator before submitting. Before we submitted the articles, we also consulted the public health department to see whether or not they would be able to enforce the scope of this article without a warrant article, or whether they could point us in the direction of a department that could do the same. This did not fall under their scope, nor were they able to point us in the direction of a town department who could enforce it, so a warrant article is necessary. There are no pet shops in Brookline now, but 13 other towns across the Commonwealth have passed similar restrictions on the sale of animals in pet shops. As it becomes harder for pet shops to sell animals in other towns, we want to ensure that they do not move to Brookline and profit off of the abuse of puppy mills and kitten mills in our town. Passing this legislation in Brookline will also reaffirm to the Commonwealth that we are leaders in terms of animal welfare and animal protection, and it will be a major step towards similar legislation on a state level. Thank you for your support. Hi, my name is Ezra Kleinbaum. I'm a Precinct 10 resident and a junior at Brookline High School, and I'm one of the ones leading the initiative behind Warrant Article 15. Warrant Article 15 is a measure to combat the abuse and mistreatment of wild animals in traveling animal acts. To be clear, this only applies to traveling animal acts and does not apply to permanent non-mobile institutions such as zoos. It also only applies to a list of covered animals, which you can find in the text of the article itself. It does not cover domesticated animals, including domestic dogs and cats, or ponies, horses, sheep, goats, other animals that may be used in traveling petting zoos, or reptiles that may be used in traveling educational shows. The language that we've introduced as Article 15 was modeled after similar bylaws that were passed and approved by the Attorney General in other towns, including Somerville, Cambridge, and Braintree. Once we adapted the language to Brookline, it was reviewed by both Town Council and the moderator before we submitted. Before submitting the language, we also consulted both the Rec Department and the Health Department to see whether or not they could enforce the scope of this article without going through town meeting. It did not fall within their jurisdiction, so a warrant article is necessary. There have not been any traveling circuses visiting Brookline in a long time, but passing this legislation here in Brookline will not only reaffirm to the rest of the Commonwealth that we are leaders on the front of animal welfare and animal protection, but it will be a major step towards passing similar legislation, which has been introduced on a state level. Thank you for your support.
Hi Brookline, I'm Alec Lebovitz, a town meeting member in Precinct 8 representing part of Coolidge Corner in your local government. And I'm here today to talk about Warrant Article 16, a warrant article that I've introduced with my co-petitioners to try and bring rent control back to Brookline. As we all know, housing affordability has reached crisis levels here in Brookline and regionally. However, Brookline's been particularly hard hit with some of the highest costs in both the state and region. Although we're exploring many different solutions to the complex issues plaguing our housing market, we need to consider policies that will bring real relief right now to vulnerable residents. That's why we introduced Warrant Article 16. Warrant Article 16 seeks to bring the ability to cap annual rent increases back to Brookline, as well as to put in place some common sense eviction protections for tenants to try and keep residents in their home and in the community they love. This is particularly important because this will have a much more equitable effect in our housing market. It will benefit disproportionately seniors, residents of color, low-income families, and other vulnerable residents. Now, how do we know Brookline can make rent control work? We know because it's worked for our community before. From 1970 to 1994, Brookline had its own municipal rent control program that we managed, ran, and oversaw locally. Unfortunately, a 1994 ballot referendum now prohibits us from putting a similar program in place today without special permission from the state legislature. This is why Warrant Article 16 is what's known as a home rule petition, which is a request to the legislature for special authorization for Brookline to create a local rent control program. We feel it's utterly important to bring rent control back now to help folks maintain stability, stay in the community, and create a better, more resilient, connected Brookline. If you think rent control returning to Brookline is something important, please contact your town meeting members and ask them to vote favorable action on Warrant Article 16. Thank you.
I'm Neil Gordon, a Precinct 1 town meeting member, member of the advisory committee, and co-petitioner with library trustee and Precinct 7 town meeting member, John Margolis. Together we petitioned town meeting Article 18, a resolution on creating a moderator's committee on forms of municipal government. We petitioned Article 18 because if Brookline is considering changing its form of government, we need a conversation, not a campaign. There's a wide variety of viable legal forms of municipal government. Representative town meeting with either a town administrator or a town manager, a select board of 5 members or a smaller board with 3 members, a town council, similar to representative town meeting, but with a smaller number of members, and several very different forms of cities. Within each broader category, there are subsets, and for each of the categories and subsets, there are pros and there are cons. As proponents of change have become more vocal, some have formed a committee and are raising money, having already concluded that we've outgrown town government. John and I believe they've put the cart before the horse, reaching their conclusion in advance of any wide-ranging, objective discussion. We don't bring Article 18 to preserve a status quo. Rather, we bring Article 18 to preserve a process that time and time again has served Brookline well. Our long history of using local volunteer talent to study, listen, ponder, and report. There is no perfect form of municipal government. Let's have a moderators committee study the pros and cons of viable alternatives, because on the issue of changing our form of government, Brookline needs a conversation, not a campaign.